The chandeliers of the Grand Lakeshore Hotel cast golden light across marble floors, where wealth moved freely and respect had a price. An elderly Japanese man stood waiting with a reservation slip no one would read, his quiet words in accented English dissolving into the air like smoke. Staff passed him. Guests ignored him. A supervisor watched and did nothing. Then a waitress stepped forward from the cafe line, bowed slightly, and spoke a single sentence in flawless Japanese. The lobby froze. What no one knew yet was that they had just humiliated the billionaire who owned every property they worked in, every contract they depended on, every future they thought was secure. And the woman who spoke those words had just changed her life forever. Kazuo Shimizu stood in the center of the Grand Lakeshore Hotel and felt invisible. Not the intentional invisibility he had cultivated for decades, the kind wealth could buy, the privacy that came from careful choices and strategic silence. This was different. This was the invisibility of irrelevance, of being looked through as if focusing on him would waste valuable energy. His scuffed leather suitcase sat beside his feet, marked by years of travel across continents and boardrooms. His faded gray jacket hung loose on his shoulders, chosen deliberately to make him look exactly like what he appeared to be, an ordinary older man traveling alone. But he had not expected it to feel like this. But before we go any further, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If you have ever stood in a room full of people and felt like no one saw you, like your presence did not matter enough to acknowledge, then you already understand what happens next. This story is not just about him. It is about every time you have ever been dismissed. The Grand Lakeshore rose around him like a temple built to American ambition. Marble floors stretched in every direction, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the enormous crystal chandeliers hanging from coffered ceilings, 30 feet above. Brass railings gleamed. Tall windows framed views of Lake Michigan like paintings worth more than most people earned in a year. Everywhere he looked, staff moved with practiced elegance, their smiles bright and empty, greeting guests who arrived in tailored suits and designer luggage and voices that assumed the world would listen. A woman in a cashmere coat was being escorted to the front desk by two bellhops competing for her attention. A man in a three-piece suit snapped his fingers and a concierge appeared at his side as if summoned by magic. The air carried the scent of expensive perfume, fresh orchids arranged in crystal vases, and underneath it all, something sharper. Judgment. Kazuo had been standing in the check-in line for 23 minutes. When he arrived, there had been 6 people ahead of him. Now there were only 3, but he had not moved forward. Every time he stepped closer to the desk, someone new would enter the lobby, someone who looked like they belonged, and the staff would wave them ahead. A young couple in matching designer activewear. A family with shopping bags from stores Kazuo owned significant stakes in. A businessman who carried no luggage, just a phone pressed to his ear and an expression that suggested the universe owed him speed. Each time, Kazuo stepped back. He told himself it did not matter. He reminded himself this was precisely why he had come, to observe how his properties operated when power was invisible, when authority wore ordinary clothes and spoke with an accent. But understanding something intellectually and feeling it physically were not the same. Right now, standing in this lobby with his worn suitcase and patient posture, what he felt was small. "Excuse me," he said quietly to a passing staff member, a young man in a crisp navy uniform with a name tag that read Dylan. His English was careful, each word placed deliberately like stones across a stream. "I have reservation. I wait long time." Dylan glanced at him, his eyes sliding over Kazuo's jacket and suitcase in a single dismissive sweep, then continued scanning the lobby for someone more important. "You will need to wait your turn, sir," he said, already moving away. The word sir felt like an afterthought, something from a training manual that meant nothing. Kazuo nodded and stayed where he was. His feet ached. He had been traveling for 19 hours, Tokyo to San Francisco to Denver to Chicago, each flight another layer of distance between himself and the life that had collapsed 3 weeks ago. His nephew, his own blood, the young man he had mentored since childhood and prepared to inherit everything. And all that time, that nephew had been moving against him, making alliances Kazuo never suspected, using legal structures Kazuo himself had built, positioning himself to force Kazuo out of his own company. The betrayal had been surgical, clean, entirely legal. It had also been devastating. So Kazuo had done something he had not done in 30 years. He disappeared. No security team, no executive assistant, no one who would look at him and see power or opportunity or threat. Just an old man with a reservation made under an abbreviated name no one would recognize, traveling to see what remained when status was stripped away. The line moved forward. Kazuo moved with it, 2 people ahead of him now. He could see the front desk where a woman with perfect makeup and an even more perfect smile typed on a computer. She glanced up, her eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second before sliding away. Not worth her time. Behind him, laughter erupted. A group of guests, 3 men in expensive golf clothes carrying drinks from the bar, had gathered near the elevator bank. One of them looked toward Kazuo and said something too quiet to hear. The others laughed louder. One pointed. Kazuo did not turn around. He had learned decades ago that acknowledging mockery only encouraged it. Next, the woman at the desk called. The person ahead of Kazuo stepped forward. One more. Just one more, and he could check in and go upstairs and lock himself in a room where no one could see him or judge him or dismiss him. He was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that lived in his bones and made every small interaction feel like climbing stairs with no end. Next, Kazuo stepped forward, setting his suitcase down carefully. The woman at the desk looked at him and her smile dimmed, brightness draining from her face like someone had turned down a switch. Name, she said, her tone flattening into bureaucratic efficiency. Shimizu, Kazuo said. I have reservation. She typed, frowning at her screen. The frown deepened. I do not see anything, she said. Are you sure you have a reservation here? Yes, I make reservation 3 weeks ago. He reached for his jacket pocket, trying to remember where he had saved the confirmation. His phone, his wallet, everything felt scrambled in his mind, exhaustion mixing with mounting embarrassment. Sir, if you do not have a confirmation number, I cannot help you. She was already looking past him toward the next person in line. Perhaps you have the wrong hotel. No, is correct hotel, Kazuo said, hearing his own voice shrink. Please, can you check again? I already checked. Her voice sharpened. We have nothing under that name. Please step aside so I can help the next guest. Step aside. Like he was blocking traffic. Like he was an obstacle someone needed to move around. Heat crawled up Kazuo's neck, that particular shame that came from being dismissed publicly, from being treated as if you were too confused to understand what was happening. His English was good, not perfect but functional, and he understood exactly what she was really saying. You do not belong here. Please, he said again, and hated how small the word sounded. I have reservation, maybe different name, I can explain. Sir. A new voice, male and sharp. Kazuo looked up and saw a man in a manager's jacket striding toward the desk, his expression all business and zero warmth. Is there a problem here? This gentleman does not have a reservation, the desk clerk said, her tone making the word gentleman sound generous. The manager looked Kazuo up and down, taking in the worn jacket, the old suitcase, the gray hair that needed cutting, and something closed in his face like a door locking. Sir, this is a luxury establishment. If you are looking for budget accommodations, there are several motels about 15 minutes down the road. He said it loudly enough that nearby guests turned to look. The message was unmistakable. You cannot afford this place. Something broke inside Kazuo then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture, like ice splitting on a frozen lake. He had built an empire. He employed over 40,000 people across 6 countries. He had donated more money to charitable causes last year than this hotel likely generated in annual profit. And in this moment, none of it mattered, because these people looked at him and saw nothing worth their time. He was opening his mouth to speak, though he did not know what he would say, when a voice cut through the lobby noise like a bell. Sumimasen. The word was Japanese. Excuse me. But it was more than that. It was the polite form, the respectful version, spoken with precise Tokyo pronunciation. Kazuo's head turned so fast, his neck cracked. A young black woman was walking toward him from the cafe area, wearing a simple pink uniform with a white apron, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from too many hours on your feet, but her eyes were kind and alert, and she was looking directly at Kazuo. She stopped a few feet away and bowed, not deeply, but enough. A small, respectful gesture that hit Kazuo like a fist to the chest. Then she spoke again, and this time it was not one word. It was a full sentence, fluent and natural and impossibly unexpected. "Sir, may I help you?" The words were in Japanese. Perfect Japanese. The kind you did not learn from textbooks, and suddenly, the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Kazuo stared at her. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The desk clerk's dismissal, the manager's judgment, the 19 hours of travel, the 3 weeks of betrayal, all of it vanished because this young woman, this waitress with tired eyes and flour dusted on her apron, had just spoken to him in his own language with his own country's tone of respect, and it felt like hearing his mother's voice after years of silence. "You speak Japanese?" he asked, still in Japanese, his voice rough with disbelief. She smiled, not a professional smile like the ones plastered across every other face in the lobby. This was real, warm, reaching her eyes. "Yes, sir," she said. "I learned it years ago. I could not help, but notice you might need assistance." The manager stepped forward, his expression irritated. "Miss Coleman, you need to return to your station. This does not concern cafe staff." Maria looked at him calmly, then back at Kazuo. "Sir," she said in Japanese, "do you have your reservation information? I can help you locate it." Kazuo felt something shift in his chest, something that had been locked tight for weeks. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." And in that moment, standing beneath the crystal chandeliers of his own hotel, surrounded by people who had dismissed him without thought, Kazuo Shimizu realized he was about to teach a lesson no one in this lobby would ever forget. But first, he would let this woman, this stranger who had shown him the dignity no one else would offer, help him find what everyone else insisted did not exist. His reservation. His identity. His truth. Kazuo Shimizu learned to disappear long before he had anything worth hiding. He was 7 years old, sitting on the floor of his grandmother's house in Yokohama, watching her arrange flowers in silence. She never explained what she was doing, never spoke about balance or intention or beauty. She simply moved, branch by branch, until something that had been chaotic became clear. When she finished, she looked at him and said, "The loudest voice in the room is often the least important one." That lesson followed him to Kyoto, where he studied economics at a university that valued tradition over innovation. He excelled not by being the smartest in the room, though he was, but by being the quietest. He listened while others debated. He observed while others performed. And when he finally spoke, people leaned in because they knew he had been paying attention. At 24, he went to Palo Alto on a graduate scholarship. Silicon Valley in the early 80s was chaos, ambition without restraint, young men shouting about changing the world while burning through capital like wildfire. Kazuo felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign species. Americans built empires by declaring them loudly. He would build his by staying silent until the foundation was unshakable. By 30, he owned logistics infrastructure no one noticed, shipping routes and warehouse systems that moved goods across the Pacific while other men fought over headlines. By 40, he had expanded into hospitality, purchasing historic hotels in secondary American cities where property was undervalued. Burlington, Charleston, Santa Fe, Tacoma. Places that mattered to the people who lived there but not to investors who chased trends. By 50, his empire stretched across 6 countries and employed tens of thousands of people, most of whom never knew his name. He preferred it that way. Visibility invited envy. Attention created targets. But silence, he learned too late, could be mistaken for weakness. 3 weeks ago, in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking San Francisco Bay, Kazuo sat across from his nephew Hiroshi and 4 lawyers he had never met. Hiroshi, 29 years old, Harvard-educated, the son of Kazuo's late sister. Kazuo had paid for his education, brought him into the business, taught him everything about how the company operated. Apparently, he had taught him too well. The lawyers presented documents. Proxy votes from board members Kazuo thought were loyal, restructuring proposals that would shift operational control away from Kazuo and toward a newly formed executive committee, chaired by Hiroshi. Legal language that sounded reasonable until you understood what it actually meant. They were pushing him out. Hiroshi never looked at him. He sat there in a suit Kazuo had bought him for his college graduation, staring at the table, while lawyers explained why this was necessary for the company's future. Modernization, they said. Generational transition. Strategic repositioning. Kazuo asked one question. Why did you not simply talk to me? Hiroshi finally looked up. Because you would have said no. He was right. But that was not the betrayal. The betrayal was that Hiroshi never gave him the chance. Kazuo could have fought. He had resources, legal teams, leverage that would have buried Hiroshi's attempt in litigation for years. But sitting there, listening to his nephew justify dismantling everything Kazuo had built, he realized something. He was tired. Not of the work, not of the empire, but of the assumption that power required constant defense, that respect had to be taken by force. So he stood up, walked out of the boardroom, and disappeared. No lawyers. No counteroffers. No press releases. He booked a flight to Chicago using a shortened version of his name, packed a single suitcase, and decided to see what remained of his life's work when no one knew he was watching. The Grand Lakeshore Hotel was symbolic. It was the first property he had purchased in America, a failing historic building he had restored floor by floor, preserving its original marble and brass while updating everything guests could not see. He had walked these halls 22 years ago when the lobby was empty and the chandeliers were dark, imagining what it could become. Now he stood here again, invisible, watching staff treat him like garbage while serving people whose only qualification was looking wealthy. He could end this. One phone call. One sentence. But part of him, the part that still remembered his grandmother arranging flowers in silence, wanted to wait. Wanted to see if anyone at all, would choose decency without incentive. So, when Maria Coleman spoke to him in Japanese, when she bowed and smiled and offered help that no one else would give, Kazuo made a decision. He would not intervene yet. He would let this play out. He would watch the disrespect grow, watch the management fail, watch the institution reveal itself completely. Because when he finally spoke, when he finally became visible again, everyone in this lobby would understand exactly what they had lost. Maria Coleman learned Japanese, the way most people learn grief, slowly, through proximity to something larger than herself that she could not ignore. She was 9 years old in Pendleton, Oregon, a high desert town where the wind never stopped and opportunities dried up faster than summer creeks. Her grandmother Loretta worked nights cleaning offices for Yamada Timber, a Japanese-owned lumber company that operated processing facilities outside town. The work paid minimum wage, offered no benefits, and required Loretta to be invisible, arriving after executives left and disappearing before they returned. But Loretta needed the money, and Maria needed somewhere to be while her mother worked double shifts at the truck stop diner. So 3 nights a week, Maria sat in corporate hallways doing homework while her grandmother emptied trash cans and vacuumed floors. The Japanese managers left things behind. Newspapers printed in characters Maria did not recognize. Notebooks filled with elegant vertical writing. Calendars with photographs of temples and mountains that looked nothing like Oregon. Maria started collecting them, piecing together meanings through repetition and pattern, the way you learn birdsong by listening long enough. When she was 12, one of the managers, Mr. Tanaka, stayed late and found her reading a discarded manual. Instead of being angry, he was curious. He started leaving simple books for her. Children's stories in Japanese with English translations. Then workbooks. Then audio cassettes she could listen to on her grandmother's old tape player. By 14, Maria could hold basic conversations. By 16, She was fluent enough that Mr. Tanaka offered to sponsor her for a study abroad program in Tokyo. Her mother said no. They could not afford it. Maria had responsibilities here, family that needed her, a future that did not include flying across the world to chase something impractical. So Maria stayed. She graduated high school, enrolled in community college, worked part-time jobs that paid too little and promised nothing. She watched friends leave Pendleton for Portland, Seattle, anywhere with possibility, while she remained, tethered by duty and debt and the quiet understanding that some dreams were not meant for people like her. Her grandmother died when Maria was 22. Cancer, fast and merciless. The medical bills consumed everything Loretta had saved, and then everything Maria had saved, and then more. Student loans came due, rent piled up. The truck stop where her mother worked closed, and suddenly Maria was supporting both of them on wages from a hotel cafe job in Chicago, a city she had moved to because it was big enough to disappear in. She worked doubles most weeks. Morning shift, serving breakfast to business travelers who never made eye contact. Afternoon shift handling the cafe counter where guests ordered $12 lattes and left no tips. Her feet ached constantly, her back hurt from standing. She fell asleep most nights with her phone alarm already set for 5 a.m., knowing she would wake up tired and go to bed exhausted. But the job taught her something valuable. It taught her to read people. You learned quickly in service work who would acknowledge you and who would not. You learned to spot kindness in small gestures, a thank you that sounded genuine, a smile that reached someone's eyes. You also learned to recognize cruelty, the snapped fingers, the interrupted sentences, the way some people looked through you like you were glass. And you learned to see the ones who were hurting. Maria noticed him the moment he entered the lobby. Not because he looked important, he did not, but because of how he stood. Upright but not rigid, patient but not passive, present in a way that suggested he was used to being seen but had accepted he would not be. She recognized that posture. It was her grandmother's posture, the way Loretta had moved through spaces that did not want her, maintaining dignity when no one offered respect. She watched him wait in line. Watched staff bypass him repeatedly. Watched his shoulders tighten almost imperceptibly each time someone waved another guest forward. She was wiping down tables in the cafe, technically off the clock, but staying late, because leaving meant going home to an apartment where the heat barely worked, and her mother would ask questions. Maria did not have energy to answer. When he finally reached the desk, Maria moved closer, close enough to hear. The desk clerk was dismissive. The manager worse. And when the old man spoke, his English, careful and deliberate, she heard something underneath the words. Not confusion. Not inability, exhaustion. The kind that came from trying to be seen when no one wanted to look. She should have stayed behind the counter. It was not her job to intervene. Front desk issues were not cafe staff concerns, and getting involved would probably earn her a reprimand from someone who thought hierarchy mattered more than humanity. But then she heard it. The old man, backing away from the desk, his face carefully blank in the way people learn to hide shame, whispered something under his breath. It was Japanese, soft, almost inaudible beneath the lobby noise. Shikataganai. It cannot be helped. The phrase her grandmother had used when bills came due and money ran out, when cancer took root and treatment failed, when life squeezed you into corners and called it fairness. Maria's hands stopped moving. The cloth she had been using to wipe tables hung frozen in her grip. She looked at the old man, really looked at him, and saw her grandmother, saw Mr. Tanaka. Saw every person who had ever been dismissed because they did not look like they mattered. And she made a decision. The lobby had its own language, unspoken but perfectly understood by everyone who worked there. It was a language of glances and posture, of who got acknowledged first and who got ignored entirely, of which guests received warm smiles and which received professional distance. Every staff member at the Grand Lakeshore knew this language fluently because survival in hospitality meant learning to read power instantly and respond accordingly. And right now, the entire room had decided that the old Japanese man with the scuffed suitcase registered as nobody, Rachel Voss, the floor supervisor on duty, stood near the elevator bank with her tablet, reviewing the evening's room assignments. She had noticed the situation at the front desk 3 minutes ago, watched the exchange unfold with detached professional interest. The old man clearly did not belong. His clothes were wrong, his luggage outdated, his English halting. The front desk was handling it appropriately, firmly but not rudely, establishing boundaries that protected the hotel's reputation. She could have intervened. Could have walked over and asked if there was a problem, could have checked the reservation system herself, could have offered the kind of managerial assistance that sometimes smoothed over uncomfortable situations. She did not move. Near the concierge station, partially hidden behind a marble column, Thomas Whitaker watched the scene with narrowed eyes. Whitaker was Regional Director of Operations for the Great Lakes portfolio, overseeing 7 properties from Milwaukee to Cleveland. He was in Chicago for a quarterly review, had stopped by the Grand Lakeshore specifically to observe operations during peak check-in hours. He prided himself on his ability to assess hotel culture quickly, to spot inefficiencies and attitude problems before they became systemic. What he saw right now satisfied him. The front desk was maintaining standards. The manager had stepped in appropriately. No one was being abusive or obviously discriminatory. They were simply enforcing the reality that luxury hospitality required certain presentations, certain assurances. The old man looked lost, spoke poorly, and could not produce a valid reservation. Whitaker glanced at his watch. He had a dinner meeting in 40 minutes. This situation did not require his attention. At the front desk, the manager's voice rose slightly, not quite loud enough to be called shouting, but certainly loud enough to be heard across the lobby. "Sir, I have been very patient, but you need to understand this is not the kind of establishment that accommodates walk-ins. We cater to a specific clientele." Several guests turned to look. A woman in an expensive pantsuit paused mid-stride, her expression flickering between curiosity and disdain. 2 men in business casual, luggage at their feet, exchanged glances and smirked. One of them, a younger guy with perfectly styled hair, leaned toward his companion and said something too quiet for most people to hear. But Kazuo heard it. Maria heard it. "Maybe you should try the Motel 6, buddy." He said it like a joke, like cruelty could be funny if you delivered it with the right tone. His friend laughed. Not loudly but enough. Enough that the sound carried. Enough that other guests noticed and some of them smiled too, that uncomfortable smile people gave when they witnessed humiliation and wanted to distance themselves from both the victim and their own complicity. The desk clerk, emboldened by the manager's support and the guest's implicit approval, crossed her arms. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave the front desk area. You are disrupting service for our confirmed guests." Kazuo stood very still. His hand rested on the handle of his suitcase, knuckles pale against dark leather. For a moment, Maria thought he might speak, might push back, might demand the respect he was clearly owed. But he did not. He simply nodded, a tiny movement that looked like surrender, and began to turn away. What happens when the person everyone dismissed turns out to be the one person they could not afford to ignore? What happens when one act of kindness exposes an entire system built on judgment? Stay with this. Defeat, Maria realized, did not always look like anger or tears or raised voices. Sometimes it looked like this. Like a man deciding that fighting for dignity was not worth the energy it required. Like someone who had been worn down by 1,000 small dismissals until one more just felt inevitable. The hierarchy had spoken. The room had decided. And Kazuo Shimizu, billionaire, empire builder, man who employed 40,000 people, was preparing to leave quietly because that was easier than continuing to exist in a space that refused to see him. Rachel Voss glanced at her tablet, already mentally moving on to the next task. Thomas Whitaker checked his phone, satisfied the situation was resolving itself. The guests returned to their conversations, the brief entertainment over. The manager straightened his jacket, pleased with how efficiently he had handled an awkward situation. And Maria Coleman, who was supposed to be behind the cafe counter, minding her own business, who was supposed to understand her place in the hotel's careful hierarchy, who was supposed to know that waitresses did not interfere with front desk operations, stepped forward. She moved quickly, before doubt could stop her, Before the voice in her head that sounded like her mother could remind her that keeping your job meant keeping your head down. Sumimasen, she said, and the word cut through the lobby noise like a knife through silk. Every head turned. Rachel Voss looked up from her tablet. Thomas Whitaker's hand froze on his phone. The manager's satisfied expression collapsed into confusion. And Kazuo Shimizu, halfway through his retreat, stopped walking and turned around. Maria bowed, not deeply but deliberately, the way Mr. Tanaka had taught her years ago. 15 degrees, eyes lowered briefly, a gesture that communicated respect without subservience. Then she spoke, her voice clear and steady, the Japanese flowing naturally after years of disuse. "Sir, may I help you?" The lobby did not gasp. It did something worse. It went silent. The kind of silence that happens when reality shifts unexpectedly, when the established order reveals cracks no one saw coming. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The desk clerk's fingers froze on her keyboard. The manager's mouth opened slightly, confusion spreading across his face like spilled water. Near the elevator bank, Rachel Voss actually took a step forward, her professional detachment replaced by something sharper. What was the cafe waitress doing at the front desk? Why was she speaking Japanese? And why did it suddenly feel like the temperature in the lobby had dropped 10 degrees? By the marble column, Thomas Whitaker straightened, his phone forgotten in his hand. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the old man with an intensity that had not been there 30 seconds ago. Something in his mind was calculating, reassessing, trying to understand what he was witnessing. The guests who had been smirking moments earlier now looked uncomfortable, their amusement curdling into uncertainty. The young man with the styled hair who had made the Motel 6 joke stared at Maria like she had appeared out of thin air. But none of that mattered to Kazuo. He stood completely still, his hand releasing the suitcase handle, his entire body responding to something he had not expected to hear. When Maria spoke, when those Japanese words reached him with their perfect Tokyo pronunciation and respectful grammar, something inside him that had been clenched tight for 3 weeks suddenly loosened. His eyes filled, not quite with tears but with the emotion that precedes them, that pressure behind your face when you have been holding something back for too long and someone finally gives you permission to feel it. "You speak Japanese," he said, his voice rough and thick. He said it in Japanese, the formality dropping away into something more raw. "How is this possible?" Maria smiled, and it was not a customer service smile. It was genuine, warm, the kind of smile that said, "I see you and I understand." "I learned it a long time ago, sir," she replied, staying in Japanese, maintaining the respectful form. "My grandmother worked for a Japanese company in Oregon. I grew up hearing the language." Kazuo's breath caught. "Your grandmother?" "Yes, sir. She cleaned offices. She worked nights. I would sit with her and the managers there. They were kind. They taught me." She paused, glancing briefly at the desk clerk and manager who were watching with expressions somewhere between shock and horror, then returned her attention to Kazuo. "Sir, I could not help but notice you have been waiting a very long time. Would you allow me to help you find your reservation?" The question was simple, practical, but the way she asked it, in Japanese, with respect, with the implicit understanding that he had been wronged and deserved better, transformed it into something else entirely. An alliance. An acknowledgement. A choice to step outside the hierarchy and stand beside someone everyone else had dismissed. Kazuo studied her face. This young woman in a cafe uniform who had no reason to help him and every reason not to. He saw exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that came from working too hard for too little. He saw intelligence. He saw kindness that had survived circumstances designed to crush it. "I have a reservation," he said quietly. "Under the name K. Shimizu. I made it 3 weeks ago. They tell me it does not exist." Maria nodded. "May I look?" she asked, but she was not asking Kazuo. She turned to the desk clerk, switching seamlessly to English. "I would like to help this guest locate his reservation. May I access the system?" The desk clerk looked at the manager. The manager looked at Maria like she had lost her mind. "Miss Coleman, this is not your responsibility. Please return to your station immediately." Maria did not move. "Sir, I speak Japanese. This guest speaks Japanese." There may be a language barrier causing confusion. If I could just look at the reservation system for one moment. The power in the room was shifting, subtly but undeniably. Maria had not raised her voice. She had not challenged anyone's authority directly. She had simply inserted herself into a situation with competence and calm, and suddenly the people who had been in control moments ago looked uncertain. Whitaker stepped forward, emerging from behind the marble column. His expression was unreadable, but his posture had changed, the casual observation replaced by sharp attention. "Let her look," he said, his voice cutting through the manager's protests. The manager turned, surprised. "Mr. Whitaker, I assure you this is not necessary, we have already checked." "Let her look," Whitaker repeated, and this time it was not a suggestion. The desk clerk stepped aside reluctantly, gesturing toward the computer with obvious resentment. Maria moved behind the desk, her movements efficient and unbothered by the tension crackling around her. She typed quickly, her eyes scanning the screen. Kazuo watched her, something like hope flickering in his expression for the first time since he had entered the lobby. After 30 seconds, Maria stopped typing. She leaned closer to the screen, her expression shifting from concentration to recognition. Then she looked up at the manager, and her voice when she spoke was very, very quiet. "I found it." Maria's finger hovered over the screen, highlighting a reservation entry that should have been found 20 minutes ago. "K. Shimizu," she read aloud, "checked in for tonight. Extended stay, 14 nights." The desk clerk leaned over, her perfect makeup unable to hide the color draining from her face. "That is impossible," she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "I searched that exact name." Maria tilted the screen slightly, so others could see. "It was filed under Shimizu K," she said quietly. "The system sorted by last name first. You may have been searching first name first." It was a simple explanation. A minor technical detail. The kind of mistake that happened in reservation systems when naming conventions varied between languages and cultures. But in this moment, in this lobby, with all these witnesses, it was not simple at all. It was damning. The manager moved closer, his expression cycling rapidly through disbelief, anger, and something approaching fear. "Let me see that," he said, his voice tight. Maria stepped aside, allowing him access to the computer. He stared at the screen, his jaw working silently as he read the reservation details. Then he went very still. "Executive floor," Maria said, her tone neutral but her words devastating. "Premier suite, diplomatic rate code, 14-night confirmed stay with late checkout privileges and full concierge services." The manager's hand rose to his collar, loosening his tie slightly. The diplomatic rate code was reserved for government officials, corporate executives, and high-value clients whose stays were arranged through upper management channels. It came with specific protocols, specific treatments, specific expectations that front desk staff were trained never to ignore. And they had just told the guest holding this reservation to try a motel down the road. Rachel Voss had gone pale, her tablet hanging forgotten at her side. She was running calculations in her head, trying to figure out how much trouble she was in for watching this happen without intervening. The answer, she was realizing, was substantial. But Thomas Whitaker was doing different math entirely. He stood motionless, his eyes fixed on Kazuo with an intensity that suggested recognition was dawning, pieces connecting in his mind that he desperately wished would not fit together. The abbreviated name. The diplomatic code. The 14-night stay at executive level. The Japanese nationality. The careful observation of how staff treated him. Whitaker had been with the company for 9 years. He had attended enough corporate meetings, reviewed enough organizational charts, seen enough internal memos to know that their parent company's ownership structure was complex and intentionally opaque. He knew there were investors, stakeholders, entities that preferred to remain unnamed in public documentation. And he knew, though he had never seen a photograph, that the ultimate controlling interest in the entire Great Lakes portfolio belonged to a private holding company based in Tokyo. His mouth went dry. "Oh God," he thought. "Oh God, no." Maria turned to Kazuo, switching back to Japanese. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion. Your reservation is confirmed. Would you like me to escort you to the executive floor? Kazuo looked at her, and his expression was difficult to read. Gratitude, certainly, vindication, perhaps. But underneath it something else, something calculating and patient. He glanced at the manager, whose hands were trembling slightly. At the desk clerk, who looked like she might be sick. At Rachel Voss, frozen by the elevators. At Thomas Whitaker, whose face had gone from confusion to horror to a very specific kind of dread that came from understanding exactly how badly you had miscalculated. Then Kazuo looked back at Maria and smiled, a small sad smile that contained decades of experience with moments like this. "Thank you," he said in Japanese. "You are very kind. But before I go to my room, I think I would like to say something." He switched to English, his accent still present, but his words clear and deliberate. "I would like to speak," he said, louder now, his voice carrying across the lobby. "To everyone." The remaining conversations in the lobby died instantly. Guests turned, sensing something significant was happening but not yet understanding what. Staff members emerged from side offices and back hallways, drawn by the tension that had transformed the space from elegant hotel lobby into something closer to a courtroom. Maria stepped back, giving Kazuo room, her role shifting from helper to witness. The manager opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to apologize, but Whitaker grabbed his arm, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "Don't," Whitaker said quietly, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Don't say anything." Kazuo reached into his jacket pocket, moving slowly and deliberately. He pulled out a leather wallet, worn but expensive, and from it withdrew a business card. He held it between two fingers, studying it for a moment as if considering whether what he was about to do could be undone. Then he looked up, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd, and when he spoke his voice was calm and measured and absolutely unshakable. "My name," he said, "is Kazuo Shimizu." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. Thomas Whitaker closed his eyes. "And I own this hotel." The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense, suffocating, filled with the weight of understanding, spreading through the lobby like water through cracks. "I own this hotel," Kazuo repeated, his voice steady. "I own the Grand Lakeshore in Chicago. I own the Meridian in Burlington. I own the Harborview in Charleston. I own the Continental in Santa Fe. I own 17 properties across the United States, and I employ over 40,000 people in 6 countries. He held up the business card, then set it carefully on the front desk. The desk clerk stared at it like it might explode. 3 weeks ago, Kazuo continued, I discovered that people I trusted were trying to remove me from my own company. People I had mentored, people I had treated like family. They used legal structures I had built to protect the business, and they turned those structures against me. It was very clever, very efficient, and it made me wonder something. He paused, looking around the lobby at faces frozen in various stages of shock and fear. It made me wonder if respect, true respect, still existed without visible power. If dignity was something you earned through character, or if it was only something you received when people knew you could hurt them. So I came here, to this hotel, the first property I ever purchased in America. I came quietly, dressed simply, with no security and no announcement. I wanted to see how my own employees would treat someone who looked like they did not matter. Thomas Whitaker had backed up against the marble column, his face gray. He knew what was coming. He knew there was no way to stop it. I stood in line for 23 minutes, Kazuo said. 6 people arrived after me and were served before me. I watched staff members walk past me like I was furniture. When I finally reached the desk, I was told my reservation did not exist. I was told to leave. I was told, loudly and publicly, to try a motel 15 minutes down the road because this establishment was too expensive for me. The manager made a sound, something between a whimper and a protest. Kazuo glanced at him, and the man fell silent. I speak 4 languages, Kazuo continued. I hold graduate degrees from Kyoto University and Stanford. I have built infrastructure that moves goods across the Pacific Ocean. I have donated more money to charitable causes in the last year than most people will earn in their lifetimes. But today, in my own hotel, I was treated like trash. Not because I was rude. Not because I was aggressive. But because I looked poor and spoke with an accent. He turned slowly, taking in the guests who had watched and laughed. The young man with styled hair was staring at the floor, his face red. The woman in the expensive pantsuit had her hand over her mouth. Others had begun edging toward exits, wanting desperately to be anywhere else. I could have identified myself immediately, Kazuo said. I could have ended this at any moment. But I waited. I wanted to see if anyone at all, would choose to treat me with basic human dignity without knowing who I was or what I could do for them. His voice, which had been calm and measured, now carried an edge of something deeper, not anger exactly, but profound disappointment. Your manager watched and did nothing. Your floor supervisor watched and did nothing. Your regional director, he gestured toward Whitaker, who flinched visibly, watched and did nothing. Your systems failed. Your training failed. Your leadership failed. And this failure, this complete moral failure, is not unique to today. It is cultural. It is institutional. It is what happens when an organization values appearance over character, when it teaches people that respect has conditions. A woman near the concierge desk started crying quietly. Rachel Voss looked like she might be sick. 23 minutes, Kazuo said softly. I waited 23 minutes to be seen by my own employees in my own hotel, and I would be standing outside right now, humiliated and defeated, if not for one person. He turned, and his gaze found Maria, who stood near the desk looking overwhelmed and small in her cafe uniform. One person, Kazuo repeated, who saw me. Who heard me whisper to myself in Japanese and decided that language was a bridge, not a barrier. Who stepped outside her assigned role, against policy and expectation, to offer help that no one else would give. Who treated me with the respect every human being deserves, not because she knew who I was, but because she understood what dignity means. Maria's eyes were shining with tears. She was trying very hard not to let fall. This young woman, Kazuo said, turning back to address the room, showed me something I was afraid I had lost. She reminded me why I built anything at all, not for profit, not for legacy. But because I believed, perhaps foolishly, that business could be a vehicle for treating people well, for creating spaces where dignity was not negotiable, where respect was not conditional. He looked at Whitaker, who was gripping the marble column like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Today you failed that test, Kazuo said quietly. All of you failed except her. And now there will be consequences. The lobby held its breath. Kazuo turned fully toward Maria, and when he spoke again his voice gentled, the hard edge replaced by something approaching tenderness. Miss Coleman, he said, may I speak with you? Maria walked forward on unsteady legs, her hands clasped in front of her to keep them from shaking. Every eye in the lobby followed her movement, and she felt exposed in a way she had never experienced, visible when she had spent years trying to disappear into the background of other people's lives. Kazuo waited until she stood before him, then spoke quietly in Japanese. Thank you, he said. Not just for today, for reminding me what matters. Maria opened her mouth, but no words came. She managed a small nod, blinking back tears. Kazuo turned to face the room again, his posture straightening, authority settling over him like a coat he had temporarily set aside but never forgotten how to wear. Mr. Whitaker, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the marble space. Please step forward. Thomas Whitaker moved like a man walking toward his own execution, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. He stopped several feet from Kazuo, unable to meet his eyes. How long have you been Regional Director of Operations? Kazuo asked. 9 years, sir, Whitaker said, his voice barely above a whisper. 9 years, Kazuo repeated. And in those 9 years, you have been responsible for maintaining standards across 7 properties. Staff training, guest services, operational excellence. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And today, when you witnessed a guest being humiliated in your presence, A guest who had a valid reservation at executive level with diplomatic coding. What did you do? Whitaker's jaw worked silently. Nothing, he finally said. I did nothing, sir. You did worse than nothing, Kazuo said quietly. You approved. You watched a moral failure unfold and you were satisfied by it because it confirmed your assumptions about how the world should work. You valued efficiency over dignity. You mistook cruelty for appropriate boundary setting. He paused, letting the words settle. You are dismissed, Kazuo said. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the property. You will receive severance as outlined in your contract. But you will never work for any company I control again. Whitaker's face crumpled. Sir, please, I have a family, I have been with this company for nearly a decade. So have thousands of other people, Kazuo said, and his voice was not angry, just final. People who depend on leadership that understands the difference between maintaining standards and practicing discrimination. You failed them today. You failed me. And you failed yourself. He gestured, and two security personnel who had been standing near the entrance moved forward. They escorted Whitaker toward the doors, and the sound of his footsteps faded into silence. Kazuo turned to the manager and desk clerk, who both looked like they might faint. You are also dismissed, he said simply. Collect your belongings and leave. The manager started to speak, stopped, then nodded, and walked toward the back offices, shoulders slumped. The desk clerk followed, crying openly now. Rachel Voss, Kazuo said, and the floor supervisor jerked upright. You watched. You assessed. You made a calculated decision to protect your own position rather than intervene in an injustice. That is understandable. That is human. But it is not acceptable in any organization I lead. You are reassigned to entry-level guest services. Effective tomorrow. If you prove you understand what dignity means, you may earn your position back. If not, you will find employment elsewhere. Yes, sir, Rachel whispered, her face burning with shame. Kazuo looked around the lobby at the remaining staff members who had gathered, their expressions ranging from shock to fear to something approaching relief that accountability was finally being imposed. Every employee at every property will undergo immediate retraining, Kazuo announced. Cultural sensitivity, language, awareness. The fundamental principle that every guest, regardless of appearance or accent or perceived wealth, deserves respect. This is not a suggestion. This is policy, and managers who fail to enforce this policy will be removed. Then he turned back to Maria, and his expression softened. Miss Coleman, he said, switching to English so everyone could understand. I would like to offer you a position. Director of Cultural Relations and Guest Experience. You will oversee training programs across multiple properties, starting here in Chicago and expanding to Denver, Savannah, and Monterey. Your salary will be $130,000 annually, with full benefits and housing allowance. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Sir, I am just a waitress. I do not have management experience. You have something more valuable, Kazuo said gently. You have character. You have empathy. You have the ability to see people when everyone else looks away. Those qualities cannot be taught in business school. Everything else, we can train. He paused. Additionally, any educational debt you currently carry will be eliminated. Student loans, medical bills, whatever financial burdens you bear that prevent you from building the life you deserve, they are gone. Consider it a signing bonus. Maria began crying in earnest now, her hands shaking as she covered her face. I do not know what to say, she managed. Say yes, Kazuo said, smiling. Say yes and help me build something better. Yes, Maria whispered. Yes, sir, thank you, yes. The lobby, which had been holding its breath, suddenly released. Someone started clapping, then another person, then another. Within seconds, applause filled the space, genuine and unstoppable, rolling through the room like thunder. Here is the question that matters. When was the last time you saw someone being dismissed and you chose to stay silent? When was the last time you stepped forward when it would have been easier to look away? The people who change the world are not the ones with the most power. They are the ones who use what they have when it costs them something. Think about that. The applause faded slowly, reluctantly, as if the people in the lobby were afraid that stopping would break whatever spell had transformed the space from a site of shame into something approaching redemption. Kazuo waited until silence returned, then spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of decision that could not be undone. What happened here today will not be forgotten, he said. But it also will not be isolated. Every property I control, every hotel, every office, every facility where my company operates will receive the same message. Dignity is not negotiable. Respect is not conditional. And the measure of our worth as an organization is not efficiency or profit, though both matter. It is how we treat people when no one important is watching. He paused, scanning the faces of staff members who remained, some ashamed, some relieved, all listening with an intensity that suggested they understood something fundamental had shifted. This is not policy, Kazuo continued. Policy can be ignored. Policy can be reinterpreted. Policy becomes meaningless when leadership decides convenience matters more than conscience. So I am not creating policy. I am creating law. Company law. Institutional law. The kind that lives in culture, not manuals. Maria stood beside him, still wiping tears from her face. Still trying to process that her life had changed completely in the span of 20 minutes. Every employee will be trained, Kazuo said. Not in customer service scripts or professional etiquette, though those have their place. They will be trained in recognizing their own assumptions. In understanding that language barriers are not intelligence barriers. That worn clothing is not a measure of character. That wealth and worth are not synonyms. He looked at the remaining guests, some of whom were still frozen in place, unsure whether they were allowed to leave or expected to stay. And to our guests, he said, his tone gentler but still firm. You are welcome here. All of you. But understand that being a guest does not grant you permission to treat staff as lesser. It does not grant you the right to mock or dismiss or dehumanize anyone. If you cannot offer basic respect to every person you encounter, regardless of their role, you will be asked to leave. Permanently. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The young man with styled hair who had made the Motel 6 joke looked like he wanted to sink through the marble floor. Kazuo turned back to Maria. In Japanese, he said quietly, when I came here today, I was testing the world. I wanted to see if kindness still existed when power was hidden. I was prepared to find nothing. You found something, Maria replied softly, also in Japanese. You found what you built. Maybe it was buried. Maybe people forgot, but it was still here. Because of you, Kazuo said. Only because of you. No, sir, Maria said, shaking her head. Because you gave people a chance to choose. Most chose wrong. But the chance existed. That means something. Kazuo studied her for a long moment. This young woman who had stepped forward when no one else would, who had risked her job to speak truth in a language that bridged more than words. He saw in her face the kind of strength that came not from power but from surviving powerlessness with dignity intact. My nephew tried to take everything from me, Kazuo said. He believed I was too old, too trusting, too rooted in outdated ideas about honor and respect. He believed the future belonged to people who understood that relationships were transactional, that loyalty was conditional, that sentiment was weakness. He paused, emotion flickering across his face. He was wrong, Kazuo continued. The future belongs to people like you, people who choose kindness when it costs them something, people who step forward when stepping back is safer. People who remember that every person you meet is fighting battles you cannot see, carrying burdens you cannot know, and deserving of grace you have no obligation to give but choose to offer anyway. Maria's breath caught. That is beautiful, sir. It is also the truth, Kazuo said. And truth, I am learning, is the only foundation worth building on. He switched back to English, addressing the lobby one final time. I am going to my room now, he announced. I am very tired. I have been traveling for a long time, running from betrayal and searching for something I was afraid no longer existed, but I found it today. Here. In this lobby. in the actions of one woman who proved that dignity is not dead, just dormant, waiting for someone brave enough to wake it. He looked at Maria. "Will you walk with me?" he asked. "I would like to discuss your new role. I would like to hear about your grandmother. And I would like to say thank you properly, without an audience." Maria nodded, still overwhelmed, still processing. "Of course, sir." They moved toward the elevators together, Kazuo carrying his scuffed suitcase, Maria walking beside him with her cafe apron still tied around her waist. Behind them, the lobby watched in silence, witnesses to something they would talk about for years, the day a billionaire stood invisible among them and a waitress reminded everyone what it meant to be human. As the elevator doors closed, Kazuo looked at Maria and smiled, a real smile, tired and grateful and genuinely warm. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you," Maria replied. And in that moment, they were not billionaire and waitress, owner and employee, power and service. They were two people who had seen each other when the world demanded blindness, who had chosen connection when isolation was easier, who had proven that dignity, true dignity, was something you gave freely or did not possess at all. The elevator rose, carrying them away from the lobby and toward whatever came next. Below, in the marble and crystal space they left behind, the Grand Lakeshore Hotel stood quiet and changed, a place where something broken had been named and something better had been born.